Moving on now to our news break. Coming in at this hour, the Cabinet Secretary has just reviewed a meeting of the Jet-Etihad deal. This is a deal that has come under a cloud of questions. And the central question at the heart of this controversy is now whether the Prime Minister's own office is uncomfortable with this contentious deal. The reason for it being so controversial, of course, is the question of 36,670 extra seats given away to Etihad in a bilateral agreement between the government and Abu Dhabi. Extra seats that critics of this deal, many of them prominent members of parliament, say is basically to sweeten the deal between Jet Airways and Etihad as Jet gets ready to sell 24% of its stake to Etihad. Joining me now is my colleague Sandeep Phukan. He broke this story initially, bringing to focus why this is such a contentious deal. Sandeep, despite the Prime Minister's office denying any rift within the government, I think it's reasonably clear that this is not a done deal yet. Although it's tough for a bilateral agreement to be reviewed by the cabinet, that's exactly what's going to happen. And at the heart of this controversy, this allegation of a deal sweetener.
Absolutely. A quick update, Barkha, as you rightly pointed out, the Cabinet Secretary actually met to examine one of the allegations. Is this deal, Jet-Etihad deal, a threat to national security? They met this evening and my sources say that they've actually cleared it, saying that no, it is not. To your next question that yes, is this a deal sweetener? Well, that's the allegation made by MPs like Subramaniam Swamy, Dinesh Trivedi, all of them who've actually written to Prime Minister's Office, Central Vigilance Commission and so on, saying that essentially there were two deals. One deal was, a private deal between two private entities, Jet Airways and Etihad. There was another deal that was between India and Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi's national airline is Etihad. In that sovereign deal between India and Abu Dhabi, India actually agreed to give additional 36,670 seats over the next 3 years. Now, many believe that, we don't have that kind of traffic. Indian carriers cannot manage that kind of traffic. This will only help Etihad, the national carrier of airline. Perhaps that's the reason why the Prime Minister has taken the unprecedented step of getting this entire deal examined at the Union Cabinet. It's a first for any government so far.
This confidential note from the Prime Minister's office has divided the government. While distancing the PM from the deals, it questioned the seat-sharing pact with Abu Dhabi, which had the stamp of the finance, foreign, commerce and aviation ministers. Today, the PMO was forced to say there is absolutely no disagreement between the ministers and the Prime Minister on the matter. The ministers are reportedly upset because they met on the instructions of the PM. The chronology is important and 22nd April is key. That's when Ajit Singh urgently sought the PM's clearance to override objections by a group of secretaries to the controversial seat-sharing agreement with Abu Dhabi. The same day, the PM asked Chidambaram to meet the other ministers and discuss this in detail. They met the same day and then wanted to urgently brief the PM. The PM and his aides met them and gave an in-principle go-ahead the same day. The PMO's controversial June letter lists objections, including the fear that the bulk of the seats would be controlled by Jet-Etihad. Yet, 2 days later, India signed a seat-sharing deal with Abu Dhabi, and within hours, Jet signed a deal with Etihad, Abu Dhabi's national carrier. By all yardsticks, the deal is reportedly lucrative for Etihad, for the seats were raised from 13,000 to almost 37,000 over the next 3 years. But Etihad is the only airline which has the capacity to utilize it.
In today's environment, political and everything, if he wants to answer every query raised, it's all to the... I'm sure that this deal is good for passengers, it's good for civil aviation, it's good for country. I have the facts and figures, and I am ready to discuss it with anyone.
जब मैं सिविल एविएशन मिनिस्टर था, तब एक कमेटी बनाई थी कि सिविल एविएशन मिनिस्टर, टूरिज्म मिनिस्टर और फॉरेन अफेयर मिनिस्टर मिलकर तय करेंगे. ये तो कभी कैबिनेट में जाता नहीं था. कभी प्रधानमंत्री तो सीट बांटते नहीं थे.
With senior MPs raising questions about the Abu Dhabi deal, saying that it's being done only to favor one airline, perhaps the Prime Minister does not want to take any chances. In New Delhi, Sandeep Phukan, NDTV.
So the Jet-Etihad deal is now threatening to divide the UPA, although there has been a clarificatory note from the Prime Minister's office denying the media speculation on rift within the government when it comes to this deal. The fact of the matter is that the extra seats given to Etihad Airways, 36,670 of them, will now be reviewed by the cabinet. And the stake that Jet Airways is selling to Etihad is also still not fully cleared. Is this now overshadowed by political differences within the UPA? What are the questions that surround the Jet-Etihad deal? Let's introduce our panel this evening. We're joined by TSR Subramaniam, former Cabinet Secretary. We're also joined from Mumbai tonight by Saroj Datta. He's a former Executive Director with Jet Airways. Also joining us tonight, Jitendra Bhargav, former Director with Air India. And joining us is well-known aviation expert Kapil Kaul. Let me start with you, Mr. Subramaniam. What bothers you about this deal? Because the Prime Minister's office has issued a clarification, and in this clarification, it makes an important argument, and that is that the sale of equity by Jet Airways to Etihad must be kept separate from the 36,670 extra seats given to Etihad Airways. Now, can we actually treat these two things as separate? Because the allegation by the critics of this deal is that these two developments are in fact interlinked, and that is the problem with the deal.
Barkha, there are two separate sets of worries that I have.
Yeah.
My worries, in a sense, are not so much about the substantive part of the deal, though I'm quite concerned about it. I'm quite concerned for a variety of reasons. Most importantly, I have seen that note by the group of ministers of 22nd or so of April, based on which the final decision was taken, that refers to objections raised by the interministerial group. Till now, I do not know what the objections were. I think some were security related. Some related to, on the one hand, we give massive subsidies to Air India. On the other, we cut into Air India space. There are 3 or 4 other arguments. I don't want to go into those arguments. Till I know those details, I would prefer not to comment. My concern is more on the other side. How can we go and negotiate a deal abroad? How can we go and enter into an agreement abroad without doing the homework? It is as if we take the decision first and then we start examining the decision. Now, I am very concerned about the process of decision making, how the objections of the interministerial group was not properly looked into, why they were not answered in advance on time, and what kind of that group of 4 ministers who met. It was neither a group of ministers nor was it a cabinet committee. What authority, that paper was not a formal paper.
Yes.
Any formal paper has to be supported by an official. I'm very concerned about these. Are we putting the cart before the horse?
Yeah.
Do we first pull the trigger and then see where the bullet is going? How are we deciding these important things? These are the 2 sets of worries that I have.
Now, very important, Mr. Subramaniam, that you raise this interministerial group of bureaucrats whose recommendations have actually, in a sense, been bypassed when it comes to the granting of these 36,670 extra seats. And let me take this to Saroj Datta, former Executive Director of Jet Airways. Mr. Datta, let me read out from the Prime Minister's office's press statement issued today, where it acknowledges that the only reason that the Minister of Civil Aviation sought the Prime Minister's clearance for concluding an MOU with Abu Dhabi, which was normally not needed, is because this was a seat entitlement which was different from the one recommended by the interministerial group. This is how the matter came up to the Prime Minister's level. This is the PMO's own statement right in front of us, the clarification issued by the Prime Minister's office. So, Mr. Datta, the allegation, as you know, is that Jet Airways is being singled out for favours. Jet Airways is being singled out for favours, and the deal of equity sale to Etihad was sweetened, in a sense, with the accompanying 36,670 extra seats. And even the PMO is acknowledging that the recommendations of the interministerial group of bureaucrats was bypassed.
Barkha, it is little difficult for me to say what processes were followed, but it is not impossible that the two were linked in some way or the other, though not directly, but they were probably concluded close to each other. But the first thing we've got to remember is that Jet-Etihad deal between the 2 airlines was concluded long ago. It was decided between the 2 airlines to conclude such a deal and finalized a few months back. and it has been going through the process of government approval since then. FIPB, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, all the parties involved. The bilateral agreement, which was a discussion between the governments of India and Abu Dhabi, probably at the DGCA level, and the carriers involved, that means including Air India, including Jet Airways and the other carriers operating to Abu Dhabi, the UAE bilateral agreement, I suppose, was concluded quite after that.
Okay.
Now, whether they were linked up, whether they were connected is very difficult for me to say.
Now, a couple call, let
And
me... Yes, sir, let me come back to you.
I would mention that...
Yes. Go ahead, complete your point. Mr. Datta, complete your point.
No, that Air India was as much a party to the bilateral discussions as Air India was.
So Air India was in the know in a sense that this was to happen for a long time. Kapil Kaul, this has been touted by the aviation minister as a very important FTI, a possible FTI breakthrough, as it were, for the aviation sector. There's also the curious question of whether a bilateral agreement can in fact be reviewed by the cabinet.
Well, Barkha, first of all, I agree that this was a very important transaction. After about 20 years, we open up FDI and make a very important policy correction. And the first deal happens quite quickly, so it's a breakthrough. FDI is important for aviation, and when it happened, we strongly supported it. And I agree with Mr. Subramaniam. What he says is that it is the framework under which you operate, which is not equitable and transparent. It is the method which you employ to basically grant these deals. I am not going to be so indirect as Mr. Datta is. I would directly say that the valuation and the entire financial package that Etihad is finally approved, bilaterals are a critical part of it. Because Etihad's principal drivers for this deal are market access to support their hub in Abu Dhabi and feed their long-haul network. They are not interested in the domestic business of jet. They are, if the market access was not given, they were running parallel operations, so they were competing with each other. Why would Etihad get into this deal and roughly cough up about 900 million in an all-encompassing financial deal if the market access, not only a bilateral, it includes a code share, it includes access to 20 points. Why would they pay?
But
so I fail to understand that.
But let me interrupt you there, because I'm a little confused by what you're saying. You're saying, of course, the two were linked. Of course, there is a connection between the bilateral agreement and the sale of equity. But what's wrong with that? That is how business takes place.
No, I'm not sure I have correctly expressed my point. I said FDI was good, the deal is good. The method to grant bilaterals and make it central to the deal is something that's where is a concern. I said I agree with Mr. Subramaniam that the way we govern our bilaterals, the way we allocate our national assets is something of a concern.
Okay.
And our concern primarily has been that this deal could not have happened if bilaterals were not central to the deal. And I'd like to tell you a couple of things. I am extremely amazed because I thought that what Mr. Datta said, that Air India was there, other airlines were there, Ministry of Commerce and External Affairs were there in Abu Dhabi when this bilateral meal happened. The entire issues that were discussed in the bilaterals are in public domain. It's exactly known what was discussed because other airlines have been of know of it.
Yeah.
When the secretary happened to take a bilateral meeting where Air India was present, you must ask them what Air India said. Air India said that this deal is not good for them. All the airlines, in fact, asked that deal is not good for them.
The important point that you're actually making is that the deal per se is good, but there are issues of transparency that surround it. Jitendra Bhargav, when Saroj Datta makes the point that Air India was in the know, that's one question for you. And the other question, of course, is that there are those who believe that you have to keep the aviation sector competitive, you have to liberalize it, you have to open it to reforms, you have to allow FDI in, and you cannot block FDI just to prop up Air India and keep it alive. How would you counter that?
Barkha, I think we have brought in too many factors and confused the issue.
Yeah.
The reality is FDI between Etihad and Jet was one part of the deal. Giving away 37,000 seats was another one. And if it is being alluded that they are interlinked, then it is an act of wrongdoing, deserving investigation and holding people accountable. The second part, as you put it, the reality is that Air India was not associated. As Kapil has very rightly said, the Secretary of Civil Aviation held a meeting of all stakeholders, all airport operators, all airlines. Everybody opposed it. The question to be asked is, if Secretary had recorded the versions of all airlines and all stakeholders, who overruled it? What were the compulsions for overruling it?
So what do you believe they were?
Mr.
What do
Datta
you
made a
believe they were?
statement that
What do you
Air India
believe
was
this were?
involved in the
After
decision-making.
all, Mr. Bhargav, this is not just Ajit Singh alone. This has been clear at the highest level. Even the Prime Minister's own note today says that we are not overturning the in-principle clearance that we gave for the extra seats. So who are you alluding to?
I am not for a moment saying Mr. Ajit Singh is responsible. Whoever is responsible in the government needs to be pulled up, because this decision is not in national interest, should not have been taken. Let somebody come out in the open and justify why giving away of 37,000 seats was important from the national perspective. What are we here for? Protecting Indian aviation. They must be placed above everybody else. Which country in the world comes out and doles it to a foreign carrier, come, take my natural resource? Now this is not done.
One second. Let me take that to Sir. Let me hang on, Jitendra Bhargav. Let me take that to Saroj Datta.
And I would strongly object to the version that when people allude that it is to protect Air India, I'm sorry. Air India has not been protected. If Air India had the clout, it wouldn't have reached the stage it is in today. It is to protect the entire national civil aviation industry.
Okay. Saroj Datta, you say that Air India was in the know when these meetings were happened. How would you counter what Jitendra Bhargav is saying?
Well, Jitendra Bhargav probably knows the entire inside story, and I am not talking about that. I am talking about what is in public domain. Whether the Secretary took a meeting or not, and whether Air India was represented or not, is not germane to this issue. I think the fact of the matter is that the questions are being raised whether the 30,000 seats that are being given to Jet-Etihad and being matched by the Indian carriers is in the Indian aviation's interest or not. I mean, first thing we've got to remember that the FDI is a question which all of us support. The whole industry and the whole government support. How is a foreign carrier going to invest in an Indian carrier if it is not allowed the accesses that Kapil talked about? Secondly, I think the objection, though Jitendra Bhargav denies it, the objection that is being raised that it is hurts Air India and is in the interest of a foreign carrier and Indian private carrier. How long a private carrier is going to wait for Air India before they can start expanding and surviving? The whole several years we've been denied. Air India has consistently got subsidies. Not all the private carriers have got it. Private carriers have got into a loss situation. They're trying to get through this FDI and the expansion of the market possibilities and cooperation with Etihad.
That's an important point. It's an important point. Let me interrupt you there. Sir, let me interrupt you there because you raised the point that Air India is cushioned by subsidies that the private carriers are not. Why should the private carriers sit back and allow Air India to be cushioned? Before I take that to Jitendra Bhargav, who's got his hand up, TSS Subramaniam, what is the exact concern with this deal? Is it that it will hurt the national carrier Air India, to which you're hearing Saroj Datta raise an important counter-argument that if you're liberalizing the space, you can't keep protecting the national carrier? Or is it the absence of transparency that is concerning you?
Barkha, this is a complex issue with 7-8 dimensions.
Yes.
So do not try to compress it into one-line answers. I am not worried about the contours of the exact deal. Bhargav correctly said, as in the case of Colgate, as in the case of 2G, the quota or the seats is a national resource. We can't, please do have any policy with regard to that natural resource. Let it be a rational thinking policy, but do not have that policy in the context of one airline or one deal, one private airline. We cannot casually give it away. By all means, have a considered policy, number one. Number two, FDI, the same kind of argument. Have an FDI policy. Have a clear policy, let everybody come in. Don't have an FDI policy introduced through the back door for Etihad and then say FDI is good for us. For example, today, tomorrow, if you say FDI is good for you, are you going to permit 5 cabinet ministers in Government of India at $10 billion? Would you allow FDI to come in? So FDI as an issue has to be discussed separately and then applied to Etihad rather than apply it first to Etihad and then say FDI is good for us. I have great concerns. Lastly, the PM's note says very important, significant question. The first sentence says, facts must be presented. It is a fundamental thing that facts have to be discussed correctly. I have grave fear that a number of facts have been misrepresented while bringing it to various places. This is a very serious charge and the whole thing comes into question all over.
All right, Jitendra Bhargav, quick last word from you. That isn't this all about protecting Air India, says Saroj Datta? Why should private airlines sit back and watch that happen?
Let me rebut Mr. Datta's argument. It is just not valid. Let's take Jet Airways, which is a good carrier acknowledged by everyone. To how many international destinations have Jet Airways started flights? And for how many sectors has it been forced to withdraw because of being economically unviable? Why were they economically unviable? Because foreign carriers had a greater stranglehold on each of those sectors. They had a head start, and therefore Jet Airways was at a disadvantage. Now what happens in the post-Jet-Etihad scenario? They will have 1 lakh seats on these sectors, take away the European and USA traffic, can dictate fares in the market, putting all Indian carriers at a disadvantage. So I would like to reiterate, it is not to protect Air India, it is to protect the Indian aviation industry. Okay. Let's not take sides. Let's have a bit of national spirit that Indian aviation industry interests must precede those of foreign carriers, irrespective of how good the deal may be.
Okay, Kapil, call last word to you. Do you see this deal, in a sense, going ahead?
Well, I totally disagree with.
All right, Mr. Datta, quick rebuttal, and then Kapil Kaul gets the last word. Mr. Datta.
No, I totally disagree with that, because to talk of that what you call Indian market will be hurt by the what you call Jet-Etihad deal, and the additional seats that are being provided are ridiculous. Over the years, the foreign carriers have been allowed to cater to the Indian market, to take away all the traffic. Air India and the Indian carriers are barely probably carrying 18 to 20% or maybe 24% the international market, and there would be no way, Air India is in no position to improve that share.
Jitendra Bhargav, one line there and then Kapil Kaul gets the last word. One line there.
Mr. Datta has a fixation on Air India. I'm saying repeatedly, it is not that Air India will lose, all Indian carriers will lose. And don't forget, Indigo, SpiceJet, Jet Airways and other carriers have just got rights to fly abroad. Give them time to consolidate, give them time to make a head start, give them time to introduce flights and then leave the foreign carriers. You can't allow Indian carriers in their infancy stage to come and compete with carriers who've got deep pockets, stranglehold on the market, 4 times the capacity. They will finish them the very reason why I said Jet Airways has not been able to succeed on international sectors.
Kapil Kaul, last word to you. You said per se the deal is a good idea. Do you believe that the deal has gone too far to be brought back now? Because in a sense, even the PMO's note is actually saying we're not taking back our in-principle clearance. Or will these questions continue to stalk the deal?
I don't think there are 2 things. One, I think the bilateral sign was an MOU. Though technically it can be cancelled, but I don't think it will be cancelled because it will hurt India's image very badly, because these are sovereign commitments you make. So I see a very little room in doing anything with whatever has been agreed. As for the deal going through, don't see any. I think they have already reworked the provisions and clauses of the agreement. There might be a few other changes that Jet and Etihad might need to do. I don't see a problem with the deal, but I wanted to make an important point to support whatever Mr. Subramanian was saying. That, and I fundamentally believe that if the bilaterals were not signed, this 900 million package would not have happened. Yeah. If this 900 million package would not have happened, Jet, which is now going to become financially stronger, would have struggled otherwise, because it has taken about them 3-4 years to raise money in the market. This deal makes them very, very strong financially and strategically. Bilaterals are central to that. If you make bilateral central to this deal and make one airline very strong, it just hurts the competitive order. it distorts the market structure.
Yeah.
And why this deal has happened and why this 900 million came through, bilaterals, market access, 20 points of call are central to it. And that's what makes Jet stronger and would to some extent distort the marketplace.
Well, questions continue to stalk this much hyped deal. We'll leave it there. I think the last word
But
on this
Kapil,
is not yet been spoken. We'll leave it there. TSR Subramaniam, Saroj Datta, Kapil Kaul, Jitendra Bhargav. Thanks for your time on the Buck Stops here. So the Jet-Etihad deal coming under a cloud of questions. Most of those questions relate to whether there has been transparency in the decision to give 36,670 extra seats to Etihad, to Abu Dhabi. Were these seats given as a deal sweetener for Jet Airways to sell its stake to Etihad? These are questions that will continue to stalk this deal. We'll keep a close eye on this developing story.